Hello everyone, this is Michael from Valor Recon here today with another Valorant video. Neon was just released, and so now that she's been out for a couple days, I'm going to be ranking all of the characters in Valorant based on their power level at the higher end of competitive play. I did one of these when Chamber came out, and I made it a little complicated talking about both pro and comp. Today it's going to be a lot quicker, and we're just going to talk about it kind of in ranked, in no particular order. So let's start with some of the obvious ones that you probably already know. While Neon has stolen a little bit of Jet's play style in terms of getting onto site, I still feel like Jet is probably the better character overall, and is still very vital to really good teams. She can push, she can get out, and she can op, even if there are characters that maybe can do those individual things better. Similarly, I think we have to put Viper and even Astra up in S tier, which is a little bit of a change from my last tier list, where I put, I believe, Viper in S tier and Astra in A tier. I did that because I felt like Astra required some communication that wasn't always there in rank. But if we're looking primarily at the highest level of pro play, I do think she is still very good. However, I will say Neon being able to push onto site and basically sprint through an Astra suck may lower her viability. I just don't think it'll make that huge of a difference. And you could argue maybe having an extra character with movement that can make her suck slightly less powerful would be a downgrade, but I do think just overall people are learning how to play Astra more, learning to play with Astra more, and so I believe that she is still one of the most powerful characters in the game. Some people may not find her interesting, but yeah. Now, instead of just looking at the top end and, doing the obvious one, let's put one that's kind of obvious here too. Yoru is kind of disappointing at this moment. We do know his rework is coming out in 3 to 4 weeks, and so I think he will be higher up on the list, but right now, the only part of his kit that is consistent are his flashes. His TP does not always provide you value. It's slower than Chambers. His footsteps very rarely do anything unless you're on a map like Bind, and so just generally, I really don't think he's gonna be that great of a character until his rework comes out. Now, another obvious one, we have Sova. Sova's just all around really, really good. He gets you lots of information. His drone may be the best ability in the entire game. And he's kind of just always been at the top of the list. Now, where these next couple characters fall into place, I think that is what is going to be a little bit different. We are now starting to see Chamber in pro play, so that is exciting. And so let's talk about some of these characters that maybe aren't so obvious. So I want to start with Breach. Last time I believe I put him in D tier, but recently I've noticed that Breach seems a lot better. And I think Fracture, the newest map, kind of exemplified that. Breach is probably the best character on that map, just due to how it's set up. And if you look at both pro play and competitive play, having a Breach makes winning Fracture so much easier. And so for that reason, I really feel like it makes a lot of sense that he goes higher up on the list. I think he's not going to be the flashy player who necessarily is flashy, going to be setting up plays for himself, but I think he can really easily set up the team. And so he's getting a massive bump up compared to last time. Similarly, Cypher I rated kind of low, but with the introduction of Neon, I do think his trips are going to be more useful than ever, stopping both Jets and Neons from entering site. I think Neon's introduction has increased Cypher's capabilities. It also allows for easier information on, say, the opposite site, where Neon can rotate pretty quickly. Omen, I still think is pretty bad. I don't think he's on a Yoru tier level. He still has some base value with his smokes, but they are slower than Astra's. They don't last as long as Brimstones. They don't hurt people like Vipers. So there's just not a huge reason to play Omen at the moment, but he does at least have that consistent value, which is what keeps Yoru in F tier, because you get value out of training the enemies and then kind of doing something different, and that requires a lot of setup and probably only works once or twice. Versus Omen, you can always put down a smoke and still be at least a little bit useful. Next, I want to talk a little bit about Reyna. I think Reyna is a solid C tier character in pro play, but I do think in rank she sits up higher. It allows you to take those games where maybe you are better than your opponents, or at least on a confident streak, and kind of just turn that into value. I think in pro play, everyone's playing a lot more seriously than even in ranked, although when you look at some aspects of it, ranked does seem pretty sweaty. I do think Reyna has a lot of value in competitive as opposed to the pro scene. And so that is going to place her, somewhat between B and A. I think in comp, she's going to have to go with an A. If it was pro play, it'd be between a B and a C. Similarly, I think Raze is kind of in a similar tier to Reyna. I think she's really good, especially on the maps, certain maps like Split. She has a lot of potential with her boom bot. In pro play, I would also probably rate her an A. She's not the greatest on every single map, but her nade can make some angles unplayable for defenders, and she has a lot of value with that boom bot. And so if you're not necessarily the most amazing person at aiming, that is probably a better duelist for you than Reyna. Next, let's talk about Brimstone. I'm going to put him up at a C. At least at this point, just because his smokes are better than Omen's. Sometimes they are even faster, they last longer. They're not hollow, which can be both a good and bad thing. I just find him really, really boring to play. In those higher competitive games, though, he does typically bring more value to the team than Omen, even though Omen can have more smokes. His molly can help drastically with post plant, and he basically doesn't have a C. And so that is kind of where I want to put him at. Let's speed through this a little bit more. Phoenix, I think, is going to be on a similar tier to Brimstone. He can always bring a little bit of value with the ability to heal and wall and flash, but it's not necessarily as good as some of the characters above him at any of that. And so I do think a slight Phoenix rework would be nice. Also, with the introduction of Neon and her walls, it makes his look a little pathetic in comparison. I think Sage is still a really good character. I'm not going to put her on S tier because I do think the high-speed nature and just in certain maps, she definitely is S tier. I just feel like she is maybe not as needed as a pick, especially with a lot of sites getting safer to plant in, which obviously happened a little while ago, but I just don't think she's necessarily as necessary, although it is nice to have one. Similarly, we're going to put Skye up there too. She's really good with her flashes, probably some of the best flashes in the game. Give you information, really easily controllable, can fake flash, do a lot of really interesting things with her. She has that heal, the dog, all of her abilities are incredibly useful. Before her nerf, she definitely was an S tier agent. I do think they nerfed her a little bit, so she's a little bit harder to play off your own util with, but she can still definitely do that and still set up her teammates. Now, I want to talk a little about Killjoy. I think Killjoy is going to sit right there with Cypher, or actually, I think I'll bump her up to A tier. I do think she is better than Cypher, just because with Cypher, there are lots of ways you can play around the utility, whereas Killjoy, a turret can be deadly on round 1, alarm bots, nanoswarms, they all can get a lot more value out than Cypher. Cypher can kind of stop the first parts of a push. Killjoy can just destroy a push, in my opinion, and depending on the map, one is going to be better than the other. Maps like Breeze, Killjoy is not very good because it's such a huge map. But something like Fracture, she seems really good in my opinion. I know in pro play, Cypher is generally the pick there. But in those smaller maps, I think Killjoy has more potential. Next, let's talk about KO. I rated him lower, I believe, last time. I think I rated him a C. With the buff to his flashes and his ult, his flashes are some of the deadliest in the game because they are very hard to notice. I do think this is something that over time people will just get better at dodging them and they won't necessarily have the same factor that they do now, but they are some of the hardest flashes in the game to dodge. His ult can be devastating, especially now that both Chamber and Neon, the two newest characters, both have ults that are weapons, and you can kind of put them away with that ult. So I do think his viability is increased by the addition of Neon. So that's pretty good. Next, let's talk about Chamber. Chamber, I put pretty high on the list last time. I do think I'm going to put him here at a B alongside KO. Looking at his pro play utilization, it's not super high. Obviously, it's not based on that. I do think he is very, very good, and he's very similar to Reyna in a situation where you can turn raw skill into kills, and the abilities kind of help with that with the Sheriff. I think in pro play, he should be rated higher, and he does have those alarm bots that reach anywhere. I just find that in a ranked setting, a lot of the time you feel like you only have 2 abilities, and I don't know, there's something about him where he doesn't necessarily feel as impactful as some of the other characters above him in the games where he's played. I'm not saying he's bad. All the characters in B tier are still fairly good characters. I just feel like there isn't as much, he's kind of on Reyna tier. I would say Reyna's probably at the low end of A, and he's probably up on the high tier of B. They're very similar in how they feel and the impact of a game. But I will note, someone who's really good on Reyna is a lot harder to defeat than someone on Chamber because Reyna can cake every fight at 150 health. Now for Neon. For me, Neon is not an S tier agent. In those higher level play fields, her slide is risky, her ult doesn't one tap, so it's not that amazing. And I actually did a whole video covering Neon. In my opinion, she is somewhere around here. And going back, I think I'm actually going to drop Reyna to B tier and put Neon on the low end of A. Obviously, we've only seen her a little bit now. She does have that flash factor, and I do think she's one of the most interesting agents to have been added, but I do think we'll see over the coming weeks whether she stays up in A or drops down to B it, but at this point, she still seems pretty good. She is new, though, so it'll be interesting to see, because I'll probably do another tier list after the Yoru rework, or maybe the next character. It'll be interesting to see if she drops a little bit. She does seem a little bit risky in the higher levels. I do think in lower levels, she'll be really good, though. So yeah, guys, that is my tier list and my reasoning for why. Let me know what you guys think about this. Do you think there are some characters that are way off? What do you think about Neon? I want to know all that in the comments down below. Also, hit that subscribe button if you like this and want to see more content regarding news and tier lists and all of that. It's just kind of fun to do. Let me know all that in the comments down below. I'll see you guys next time.